especially unrealistic expectations. Like nobody wants to hear that it takes 3 years to build an audience. And for me, Todd, I'd love to hear what you think about this. I think the first year, you're still kind of finding your voice.
Yeah. At least the first 50 episodes, you're trying to find your voice. Hey everyone, welcome to Podcast Insider Special Edition. I have my good long-term friend here, Dave Jackson. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing good. Fresh back from PodFest and revigorated and ready to go.
Yeah, and you almost got out without the bug, but it sounds like, but
got a little bit of the sniffles going on still, a little bit of a sore throat, and it's like, oh, well, that's what you get for, getting on a plane with people, apparently.
That's right. Hey, for the folks that don't know you, why don't you do a quick introduction, just, the background, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. My background is in teaching. I used to teach people how to use a fax machine, hence the gray hair, and how to send email and things like that. And then got into podcasting in 2005, and that's when I launched the School of Podcasting. And for 8 years, I was at Libsyn as the head of podcast education, and then recently moved to Podpage. In there, I was inducted into the Podcaster Hall of Fame back in 2018, and I'm also the author of the book Profit from Your Podcast.
So I think a lot of the Hall of Fame folks have a book in them, or a book. Is that the right word to say? I don't know. Yeah. I think I think a lot of the folks have put out books, and that's how it was always a fun experience. I want to take us back just a little bit. Podcasting has evolved. I always called it an evolution versus a revolution, but the evolution of podcasting from early 2000s to now, it's just this major change. What are you thankful for the evolution and how things have changed, and what do you miss?
Oh, the evolution is amazing. I'm sitting here with a Zoom PodTrack P4 on my desk, which is, I think, going for $150. And I've got a piece of equipment in my closet that probably was, $800 when I bought it, that kind of does the same thing. So the technology's made it a whole lot easier. And I guess if there was something I miss, everybody seems to, want to do, kind of what everybody else is doing. Where in the early days, it was so much more creative with, Yeast Radio, which was Madge Weinstein, which turns out Madge was a character. And just the whole point was we didn't want to be radio.
Right.
And so everybody was going in all sorts of different directions. And I forget the one guy, but the whole point was he kept bad-mouthing his spouse. And I'm like, dude, one day she's going to hear you. And it was just one day he just quit podcasting. We're like, she found the podcast. That's the end of him. So it just seems now that we're all kind of trying to be radio. And I'm like, in the early days, we didn't want to have to come on and, it's 36 degrees after the hour, traffic and weather on the 10s, and we're not doing traffic and weather, but sometimes I'm like, it just seems like we're trying to be radio.
Especially with some of the shows with the ad load. There's 4 ads before the show starts, 7 minutes in, there's 2 ads. And I'm like, oh, just stab me in the throat.
Yeah. I always say, look, I like Conan O'Brien, but when I see his short videos on YouTube now that are 3 minutes long and in the middle, he has to stop for an ad. And I'm like, really? I'm like, change the name of the show from Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend to Conan O'Brien Needs Some Cash. And that guy doesn't. He's sold a bunch of stuff. I'm like, but yeah, I'm with you on that. The ad load, I think the guys, I forget the one ad agency, they recommend 10%. Like, let's cap it at 10%. And I'm like, well, we went past that a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think about my own show that I do on the tech side. I do like 50 to 60 minutes, and I do one long one. And if I put another one in there, I'm okay. But I put a third one in, and then just the numbers go, woo,
as people, the hate mail starts coming in.
Oh, yeah, and they all bail. And but at the same time, there's this thing where, like, okay, if I don't run ads, will you support me? And that's yet to be seen on value for value. We can talk about that later. But I think you having been involved in literally schooling, the school of podcasts, schooling podcasters for all these years, is it rinse, wash, repeat, or is it evolved?
It's somewhat the good news is in the early days, I'd go up to somebody and I go, do you listen to podcasts? And they'd be like, do I need an iPod for that? So we're past that phase. But it's funny because you would think it would be the technology or, all these other things that stop people. And it's not, it's their head. Nine
Right.
times out of 10, I've got somebody like, don't turn your back on the boomers because they've got time, money, and experience, but they've convinced themselves that, well, me and technology aren't friends. And who's going to listen to me and the whole imposter thing. So I need to go back and get a degree in like psychology to help these people. I had a guy that was a pilot in the Air Force, flew in Afghanistan, and he was the guy that'd be flying, and you would come up and kind of tap into his plane and refuel.
Yeah.
So obviously he was a brave person, and then he was a keynote speaker, and he had a book. And I'm like, okay, you've got the guts, you've got content. Like, what is stopping you? And he said, I think it's just my military background of afraid of looking stupid. And so I basically said, well, give me your first episode. I said, you trust me, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I'll let you know if you sound stupid. He's like, okay. And it scripted it out. And it very much sounded like he was reading a script. And I'm like, okay, this is great content, but the delivery needs a little,
Right.
add a little, And basically, the third time he sent it to me, I said, this is amazing. I can't even tell you're reading this. He's like, because I'm not. He goes, maybe that's my workflow. Maybe I just write it out, read it a couple times and get to go. But he had the equipment, he had the website, he had everything, but he couldn't get over himself. And that's the one thing that hasn't changed is people, I don't know if it's our upbringing or what, but it's the thing that pushes past that. And to me, the heart of a great podcaster is somebody who wants to serve their audience, like they want to help them in some way, because when the need to serve your audience is greater than your worry of looking stupid, that's when you actually press record.
It's interesting because I'm sure you saw it at Libsyn too. We'll see people come and sign up for a hosting account, and I'm getting this report daily of all these shows that are not published an episode yet. And, about a week in, I'm sending a little email. Hey, can we help you? And it's crickets, getting crickets back. But yet 30, 60, 90 days, and they're paying for something they're not even using. And, or they cancel at 30 days and I go looking and they're nowhere else. And it's this fear of hitting record is really, and we've been working hard on trying to figure out how to smooth that transition of getting folks to at least just hit record and get the first episode out. Because I think they get one out, they go, but.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people it's not that there's no learning curve. I'm like, but have you ever been in the car and your jam comes on, so you crank the volume on the radio? Let's assume they're listening to the radio.
Right.
All right. And I said, and then the phone rings. And I go, if you're going to answer it, what do? Well, you turn down the radio so you can hear the phone. And I go, so you know how to mix audio? I go, have you ever attached a photo to an email? And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so you know how to upload an MP3 file to Blubrry. I go, it's not that you don't, it's not that there's no learning curve, but you kind of already have a lot of the skills that you need.
Yeah, then you run the folks that don't know how to cut and paste. So there's a little bit of that out there. So, and those folks you really have to help. So, I think then if you think about the evolution and lessons you've learned, then there's a little bit of human nature here that can't change anything. It's about either I'm afraid to hear my own voice, it's going to suck the first episode. I'm going to be honest with you, all first episodes suck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mine did.
My first episode of the School of Podcasting, that's the title of it, is Your First Podcast is Gonna Suck. And I mean, when I wrote my book, Todd, you wrote the very first book on podcasting. the first thing you turned in, it's not like your publisher went, "Oh, this is good, great, put it on." Like mine went through
No.
5 revisions.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. Authors have revisions, athletes have preseason, actors have dress rehearsal. I'm like, so, maybe record that first one and get some friends and family to listen to it that will actually give you honest feedback because, mom's going to say it's great, but get some feedback on that. Maybe before you release it. That's
Yeah.
just a,
Mom's always going to say it's great, even if it sucked,
well, and I always love that mom would be like, "Oh, look at you with all the lights and the microphones," and I'm like, "Notice, mom is not talking about the content; she's
Right,
talking
right,
about the
right.
equipment." Yeah, exactly.
And I think too is the content creators or podcasters, folks that are aspiring podcasters have so many conflicting messages right now. And they
Yes.
have such a wide broth of places they can be. They can be at TikTok if TikTok doesn't get, sent
Right,
away
right.
here in the US. They've got Instagram, they've got YouTube, they have Facebook, they have all these places. And I think they get a little bit of sensory overload when all they really have to do to start is, again, you and I have been in this business a long time, so we have, good backgrounds and everything, lights. And I think that that microphone at a table in a corner of a room and record is just such a much simpler concept, and we don't have to get complicated with all the extra stuff, you know. So what do you think then are besides pressing record, what are the most common mistake a new podcaster makes?
I think I always say you need to know your why. And Todd, you were the first guy I heard that podcasters don't make it past 7 episodes. I
Yeah.
think you're and you keep checking that stat, and it seems to be true.
Seems to
But
be pretty close, yeah.
if you don't know your why, then or you're gonna like, hey, I'm not making any money at this. Let's say that's the why. Well, okay, well you didn't set up your content. You're not selling anything. That whole 9 yards. So you need to know your why. You need to know your who. And I hear this a lot where it's it's for men 25 to 55. And I'm like, I got news for you. There's a big difference between a guy that's 25 and a guy that's 55. I'm like,
Right.
that's probably not going to work. But if you know who, then you have to entertain them or educate them or something, inspire them. And that's where podcasting gets hard. What can I talk about that's going to educate or entertain the who while moving them towards my why? Because if I don't get my why, I burn out. If I don't get the who educated and growing, then I'm never going to grow my audience. And so that's the what part. What am I going to talk about? And then you and I always, I heard you on the new media show, and I always ask this, and it's fun watching people go, "What do you mean?" And that is, how are you going to measure your success? And people go, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, how are you going to measure your success?" And they're like, "Well, downloads." And I'm like, "Okay." I go, because let me give you an example. I do a podcast about podcasting. Everybody in January says, "This is the year I'm starting a podcast." So my download numbers go through the roof in January because everybody's trying to get caught up in what do I need to do. And then in February, much like every gym in America, my numbers start to go down
Right.
because some people figure out this is harder than I thought. But my membership goes up. So if I base my success on downloads in February, I'm suicidal because they're just taking a nosedive.
Right.
But my membership is going up. So I'm ecstatic in February because I'm like, all right, things are working.
Yep.
And so many people I don't think do that. I also don't think they have realistic expectations, and that's kind of not their fault because you do have the guys out there for 3 easy payments who will guarantee you to be at the top of the charts, and money will fall from heaven. And I'm like, to them I always go, okay, so who was season 5 winner of American Idol? And they go, what? And I'm going, who was season 5 winner of American Idol? And they're like, I have no idea. I go, exactly. I go, you can't really you can put people at the top of the charts. Let's say they do that, however they do it, probably not in a honest way. But I'm like, it's one thing to get to the top of the chart. It's another thing to stay there.
Yeah.
And very few have done that. So that's kind of the stuff that I think kind of, especially unrealistic expectations. Like nobody wants to hear that it takes 3 years to build an audience. And for me, Todd, I'd love to hear what you think about this. I think the first year, you're still kind of finding your voice.
Yeah. At
And
least the
then
first 50 episodes, you're
yeah.
trying to find your voice.
And so the second year, you finally got it dialed in and your audience starts to grow. And by the third year, your audience is starting to spread the word. But when I hear somebody say, I want to start a podcast and quit my job in 6 months, I'm like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen.
You know, it's amazing when I talk with podcasters, it's probably 90% when I ask them, well, first of all, the calls are all about how can I grow my show? And I used to go immediately to their website and doing this deep dive analysis, but I've changed over the past couple of years. The first question I ask them is, what is your goal of your show? And then I zip. I don't say nothing. And there's this big, long, dramatic pause. And sometimes they ask me, are you still there? And I said, yeah. So what is the goal of your show? And oftentimes people have not even thought about that. So it's the same thing about what you've just said. Because if you don't know what the goal is, how are you going to get there? And it comes back. Sometimes folks will say, oh yeah, I want to become the authority, or I want to drive business to my website, or I want more boots coming through the front door, or whatever the goal may be for their show. And I often tell them in the early days, my goal was to get a press pass to the Consumer Electronics Show, or which is now called the CES show, and just, let my blog be a little more successful. And then it turned into, I had to make money because it was being very expensive. But that question, and we work on that, and then with tools like ChatGPT, it's beautiful now. You can just write out, your 6 or 7 goals and say, give me a mission statement. And ChatGPT does a pretty good job of giving you a mission statement. And then you can ask it to do an action plan. And I thought, wow. And I looked at I kind of did my scenario. And it gave me an action plan that I actually kind of followed for a couple of years. I didn't even really knew I was following an action plan. But I think that this reality that you just mentioned about, and I tell folks, you got to do this every week for 2 years. Every week. You can't miss a week. I mean, I can't take a vacation? No. You have to have content every week for 2 years. So people build you into their life and you grow this empire. And I think when you tell people that, sometimes it scares them, but it's reality. Unless you're Oprah.
Yeah, exactly. And even that doesn't always work.
Right.
I remember when Kathy Lee Gifford and Larry King, those are 2 guys that had podcasts, and they were just awful.
Yeah.
Absolutely just thought, well, I'm Kathy Lee. Everybody will tune into me. Well, you got to have something to say,
Yep.
So, yeah, it's not, it's one of those things where that's where we always talk about passion. You have to have the passion to kind of push through. Because at the first part, I've seen people devastated because, of course, the first episode, you're kind of going through that learning curve and you're figuring out how to use Audacity or whatever. And you go through all this work and you put it out and you get 23 downloads. And you're like, wait a minute, I got 25 people in my family. Like, Aunt Irma didn't listen or whatever, and that can be really devastating. And so it's that passion that, I will talk about this whether I make money or not.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look at some of the more successful podcasters, not all of them started out with a goal of making money.
No.
They were doing it because it was fun.
Yeah.
And they were talking with their friends. I had a guy was in speaking at Indianapolis this year, and I was kind of doing what we're doing now, like, what's your why? And he's like, well, I just like talking about sales and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, how are you going to measure this? He's like, well, I don't know. I'm just doing this because I love to talk about sales with my friend. And I go, guess what, buddy? And he's like, what? I go, you have a very successful podcast.
That's right.
And he's like, really? And I'm like, you are getting your why. I go, it's nice if other people get to listen. I go, but anything else? And there's a movie out about this female boxer. I think it's called The Fire Within. And she comes back. She's won a gold medal. She's really young. And she's coming back and she's expecting to be on the Wheaties box. Well, it's female boxing many, many, many moons ago. Not really a cherished sport at the time. And so she was talking with like a business manager and he's like, what's the problem? Is it Is it the money? Is it the recognition? And she screams at him. She's like, money is recognition. And I think some people, because they hear other people making money with their podcast, that they think that's the only way to be successful. And I had a guy once that started a podcast, and I asked him, I said, how's it going? He's like, well, the downloads are, kind of flat and this and that. And he's like, but I got to tell you, I love it. And I go, why? And he goes, I'm growing my network like nobody's business. He's like, because all these people that I tried to talk to in the past, he goes, they wouldn't give me the time of day. He goes, but now when I say, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? He's like, so I'm growing my network and making these relationships. And so it's not always about, the almighty dollar. There are a lot of ways you can benefit from a podcast.
In the early days, I said, when it's no longer fun, I'll quit. And so far, it's been fun. There are times, know, when you're not feeling 100%, you're like, oh man, I have got to pull the mic up. And, I've learned also to not do a show when I'm, in the pits, because it just bleeds through. So, I think if we look at podcasters today, and I do get tired of talking about the money, I really do. It is that passion. I agree. If you have a passion for something, and you can talk about it every day, 7 days a week, that is your podcast. That is the topic you should be covering, because I often get calls now where people are chasing categories. True crime is real famous right now. I should do a true crime show. I said, do you know anything about crime?
Right.
You got any background whatsoever? No. I said, how are you going to do a good true crime show?
Yeah.
What do you know? What are you known for when you get together with your friends and family? What are you always talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I always love that, what's the thing I can talk about, do the least amount of work and make the most amount of money.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, that's just not the attitude to go in. And, a lot of people default to ads, and Todd, you were, I think, the first person
one of the
that
first
tried to basically get a group of podcasts. Let's take all the football people and let's take all the female fitness people and try to get them ads. And God bless you, because that was a hard thing to do, almost impossible.
It was like herding cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was crazy.
Yeah. So when you say I'm going to start a podcast and get ads, I'm like, okay, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So
answer your email. I had money for people, and they wouldn't even answer their email. And then 2 months later, hey, I found this email about this ad. Can I still do that? I'm like, that's gone. Yeah. So you told me you want to make money.
You gave them a bigger percentage.
Yeah.
If they got back within a certain amount of time. And I was like, that's sad that Todd has to incentivize you to read your email.
You get back to me in 24 hours, you're 30. I only take 30%. You are outside the 24-hour window, I'm taking 50%.
Yeah.
Or you only get 50%. So that did kind of motivate some to make sure they were checking their email. Now we're texting people and, trying to, So, but people are very non-responsive. They say, I want to make money. But, 3 weeks after the deal's gone, you're replying to me. Well, sorry, that opportunity has sailed. Yeah. What do you think then? You've been educating podcasters, and I'm sure you've again, and what I'm trying to hone down to here is, how's the education changed?
Well, the thing I love is when I first started, and I still have these, right? I have step-by-step tutorials that does that, but it's much more personal, because back then, in the early days, there wasn't even you had Skype back in the day.
Yeah.
But that means people had to download software and install it and set up an account. So it wasn't quite as easy. And now with Zoom, I love the fact that there are times when somebody will send me something and I'll be like, hey, are you available in like 30 minutes? Like, let's just hop on a Zoom. Mm-hmm. This is, we do this at Podpage, where somebody will have a domain question, and trying to solve a domain question over email is going to take you
5, 6, 7. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's just hop on Zoom and I'll fix them in 2 minutes. So that's definitely easier. I use an app called Volley, and it's interesting because I was using it. I loved it, and it was free. And that's not a good business model. They did come out with they came out with a paid version, but they made the mistake of all the paid stuff. It's not that nobody wanted it, but most people didn't want it. And so they actually went out of business. And I was so bummed, and I found kind of an alternative. They came back with some VC money and they said, hey, we kind of redid this so that they can stay in business. So some of the stuff that was free isn't free. And we're all just like, here, take my money. Don't go away. And what I love about that app is I can send, and you can send me a text message, you can send me audio, or you can send me video, or even a screen share if you want. So I just had a conversation with Kenny this morning because he's like, hey, I had a question about Riverside or Descript and blah, blah, blah. And I hit the button, record the answer. And especially because, podcasting's global. So for a while, I had a guy in Egypt that we just kept going back and forth on that because that guy doesn't want to get up at, 3:30 in the morning to get on a Zoom call. So that's made it a lot easier to connect with students in that aspect. And I think that's the part I love the most. I used to go around and I would try to get people to hire me, and I still do. If you want to hire me, by all means. But that was, quote, my big ticket. And then it dawned on me by the time I answered 3 or 4 questions for free, and they finally hired me, and they would come on for an hour, and I would answer every question they had, and I would never see them again because I answered all their questions. And I was like, that big ticket isn't really that big because I spent X amount of hours getting them to sign up. So either need to raise my price. Well, my background's in teaching. I love to teach. And I just went, well, this is dumb. I've got people here who are already giving me money for my membership site. Let's just say, hey guys, unlimited coaching, if it's on the schedule, take it. And it's kind of funny because everybody's kind of doing like that thing with like the last pizza. Like they don't want to be the person that eats the last piece. And so they're always really tentative. I'm like, hey, if it's on the schedule and you want it, take it, So that's always kind of fun. But that's something I've been doing for about probably 6 months now. And it's weird because I'm not wasting time knocking on doors, getting, twisting somebody's arm to hire me. And it's also resulting in people sticking around longer. I'm working with a business coach right now, and he's like, how long do people typically stick around? And I told him, he's like, that's 3 times the average. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of was the whole point of it. So it's made things a lot easier. And then the other thing, we're not teaching people Dreamweaver anymore, So whether it's WordPress with, PowerPress plugin, that makes it easy, or if you're just using your host or whatever it is, everything's a heck of a lot easier. I remember when I bought that PodTrack P4, or if it's a Focusrite or whatever, and I'm going through the manual because we had always used mixers made for musicians. And we're like, how do we do mix minus on this thing? And I finally emailed support at Zoom. I go, how do you turn on mix minus on this thing? And they email, and they're like, oh, it's built in. You don't have to even think about it. Like everybody's going to hear everybody, and it's there. So it's a lot easier. There's not a lot of things. I shouldn't say, well, there's less things to get hung up on than there were in the early days.
Daniel and I were talking about that, on how you don't have to explain it anymore. And it's kind of funny because the mixer I have, basically an arm's reach beyond this arm reach, it's still got mix minus, So when that piece of gear dies, when it goes to electronics heaven, I will replace that with a box that's about this big, compared to this big monster thing I have. And I will never, ever think about mix minus ever again.
Well, I know you bought the Rode video tool.
Yeah.
Does that mean the TriCaster has finally been retired?
It is not. The TriCaster is still in use. And the Rode tool, I shouldn't have pulled the trigger so early on that. For what I wanted to use it when I was in the Philippines. And after I got over there and got everything set up, I'm like, no, just the way I'm doing it is just as fine now using the webcam. I don't need multiple shots. It's a powerful, powerful device. And if the TriCaster ever goes belly up, honestly, I'll probably just go to OBS or something. I probably, and tie that into a regular mixer and be done with it. But that's the beauty too, is the equipment piece has gotten easier. Podcasters, what mic should I buy? And buy the ATR 2100X to get started. It'll grow with you. And then someday maybe you want to buy something like this. You don't need this to get started.
Yeah. I had somebody at the School of Podcasting ask me about it, and luckily I had a lot of old videos And I showed them like where I started from, which was I was bankrupt and divorced in my brother's basement. And I had a picture of this extremely messy room. I'm like, this is where the School of Podcasting was born. And then you saw a picture when I had moved to an apartment and it was kind of weird. And then here's when it was, when I lived in Cleveland, I actually rented a business office. So here's that. And you just saw the progression. I go, I didn't like start here.
Right.
Like right now, I've got I forget the name of the bar, but I've got a bar that goes across my ceiling that's pressure. And then I'm hanging lights now because I used to have lights on stands.
Yep.
But the stands, because the lights were so high, the stands had to be really wide. And so anytime I had to get paper off the printer, I had to tiptoe through the stands to get over there. And I'm like, so I didn't start here, you know. And then I used to have my lights on a stand that fit on the desk, which was fine until you accidentally bump the desk and then everything looks like a bad episode of Star Trek, you know. So you just learn these things along the way. And, you know, you don't have to start here either. I mean, going back to what you talked about, it's still, I mean, this was probably 15 years ago, but a guy had spent probably close to $2,000 on his setup. And he had video before video, was, you know, video, and all this great stuff. And he looked amazing. And I said, great. I'm like, what do you need help with? And he said, I'm not sure what to talk about. Oh. And I was just like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So, you know, first things first.
You know, it's like I went from a hotel room in Texas to a bedroom in Hawaii with old furniture behind me that had glass that caused reflections. Because I started video early. And then into my basically business place I was at for 5 years. And then my landlord said, well, we don't want you here no more, even though I was completely good tenant and paid my rent on time and everything. And I moved out, went into a storage unit thinking, what am I going to do? And basically recreated in a little 10 by 10 area here I live in a loft. So I can look like 25 feet straight across and, you know, there's a wall. In 40 feet that way, there's another wall. So I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be fun. So, you know, I had an old truss. I used to hang my lights kind of the way you did from a bar from the ceiling. And I had an old truss. And, well, I'm a bachelor, so I guess it doesn't matter. No one here to complain about the lights. And so, you know, it's worked out. But this is because I've been doing this for 20 years, not because I'm just getting started. If I'm just getting started, I'm not going to spend that kind of money. I want the podcaster to get past, you know, let's get you past episode 7 and let's make it to 20 and we'll improve as you go. You know, I think too, the monetization piece, which probably we should talk just a little bit more about, is really not changed that much for new creators. It's hard.
Yeah, the only thing, as I think about that, because I mean, there's always been affiliate stuff you could do. Yeah. I think there's probably more of that. Obviously, there's more. There are places now that, you know, you can get ads, but the problem there is you got to have the 10,000 downloads. Mm-hmm. But there are places like Blubrry. You guys have the deal where you can basically start making money from day one.
But you make 50 cents, you know.
Yeah.
And we don't write our first check until $50. So, yeah.
It's going to take a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't changed a lot. I think and that's the other thing that people don't do, that you have to kind of, again, get them out of their head. I had a friend of mine, I'd known her for 6 months. She started a podcast, been about 6 months since she launched it. And I asked her and I said, you know, how's everything going with the show? She's like, oh man, numbers are going up. This is great. And I said, awesome. She's like, but I'm not getting any speaking gigs. And I said, I've known you about a year. I said, I've listened to most of your shows. I go, I've never heard you mention that you do speaking. And she's like, oh yeah, I just spoke to a bunch of kids in the Bronx in a high school. And I'm like, okay, well, like you got to mention that in the show. And she said the same thing that I hear a lot. Oh, it makes me feel salesy. And I said, oh, like, I said, like a 1970s used car salesman. And she's like, exactly. And I said, that guy's selling you a bucket of bolts. And she goes, exactly. And I go, so you're telling me your podcast is a bucket of bolts? And she said, no, I spent like $10 or 10 hours on that thing.
Yeah.
And I go, so you're helping people? And she goes, yeah. And I go, so why are you stopping people why are you stopping yourself from helping people?
Yep.
And she just looked at me. She said, okay, you're good. And I said, but here, it could be as simple as, I was talking to a bunch of high school kids this weekend, and this one young man came up to me and asked me this question, and I thought, boy, that'd be a great topic for a podcast. I go, there you go. You just let your audience know you're a speaker. I go, there are other things you can do to, you got to let people know, but it's another one. You got to get people out of their head, and especially when you get outside the United States. From what I understand, Americans love to talk about themselves compared to people in Europe. And so, if you want to monetize, go listen to a GoDaddy spot on Todd's show. You got to
the 1790th one.
Yeah. So that's another thing where it's, sometimes we got to get out of our own way.
The ask is hard. People don't like to ask. But, the thing that blows me away, and still to this day, and I think the story is, I lost my dad on the 200th episode, and I was I was supposed to record 200, but he died on the day I was supposed to do 200 in an automobile accident. Went home and buried him, and I had made this like 3-minute thing to the audience. I said, hey, I'm going home and bury my dad. We'll do 200 when I get back. Yeah. And I came back, and the interaction in the show up to that point had been here and there. I had a few guys that were haters. A guy named Sal. By the way, Sal, if you're still out there, I want you back to the show. I loved your negative commentary. Just joking. So I get back 10 days later, and this was really before we had cell phones that really were connected like they are now. And open my email, and there's 5,000 emails of condolences from my audience, and I'm just like, I really didn't ask, but I told them what was going on, and they responded. And it just really, from that day forward, the whole perspective on the audience relationship changed. And I think that we have to realize, and until you're walking through an airport and you're standing in line at McDonald's and getting ready to order a burger, and someone hears your voice and grabs you and say, I know your voice. I'm a fan of your show. Or you're at an event and someone comes up and says, thank you. I don't think the podcaster truly understands the power they have and the connection they make with their audience. They know you better than probably you know yourself to an extent, and yet we don't realize that they do. And so, like you said, sometimes we just got to say, hey, I need some help, or I need this, or I need that. And usually the audience comes through.
Yeah, I remember once, Todd, you are the king of own your own stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd built a Facebook group for the School of Podcasting. I went in there because every Friday I do group coaching. It's called Lunch with Dave. So I went in and I said, hey, Lunch with Dave starts in 20 minutes, and got kicked out of my own Facebook group for spam. And I was like, that's not even like what? And so I go to Facebook, and I'm following all their directions on how to contest and blah, blah, blah. It was a couple weeks later, and I'm like, Look, now luckily I have 2 Facebook profiles, so I was still in the group, so I could kind of do some stuff. But I finally, just on my podcast, I said, hey, does anybody know anybody at Facebook? I've been kicked out of my own group. I've followed all the rules. I went back, blah, blah, blah. And I just don't know what to do. And I still don't know. I remember somebody said, well, I know somebody whose sister's cousins, blah, blah, blah. And next thing I know, I'm back in.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't know what, switch I flipped, but that was amazing. And so, yeah, your audience, I've known people, Michael Butler, at one point his computer died, and somebody sent him a new, iMac laptop, and, all sorts of stuff where, it's that whole law of reciprocity,
and
you're giving them value, and then they come back to help you out.
You never know who's listening. My Steve Jobs stories, the most famous one, where I basically was bitching about the original Mac Mini. I mean, I was railing this thing on the show. I said, if I could talk to Steve Jobs. About a week later, I did 10 minutes. Said, you're on, because I had said on the show, if I could just have 10 minutes, and he sent me a MacBook Pro from that conversation. Yeah. It's crazy. So, yeah, you never know who's listening, or who someone important is listening as a friend. So it wasn't Steve that was listening to the show. It was someone at Apple, or someone that had his ear. And, that was pretty high up in the food chain. And even when we're doing the the new media show, I'm always like talking to people that I know that are listening to the show. So I think if podcasters realize that, then that will help a lot. And first sponsors came from the audience
Yeah.
from a
Well,
monetization
and
standpoint.
back in the days of the New Media Expo, our friend, of course, I say in quotation marks, Rick Calvert, I think he called you. I know he called Rob Greenlee, who at the time worked for Spreaker, and he talked to Rob Walsh, and he said, hey, we've got to replace our head of podcasting at this event. Who do you think? And you, Rob, and Rob said,
Dave.
what about Dave Jackson? Yeah. And so
Did you get fully paid, by the way?
it took a lot of years. And yeah, because I remember he sent out a thing because Rick just left everybody high and dry.
Yeah.
And I'd been paid for half of my gig there.
Right.
And it was, it was four figures. And so he then said, hey, Barb is now taking care of, and he had some sort of travel event that might still be going. And so I reached out to Barb and I'm like, hey, like you guys owe me, a considerable amount of money. Any chance, I could get that? And she said, can we pay you like over, time? And I would just every now and then be like, hey, it's been 6 months, and they'd send me, $50. And then I'm like, okay, it's been here's 110. And I'm like, oh. And so eventually got down to where it was like a couple $100. I'm like, all right. But it took, and I had to, and she'd always, we're working on this. And I'm like, well, it doesn't look like it.
Well,
but,
my checks bounced and never got.
Yeah. I think Pat Flynn was another one.
Yeah.
But what was funny is we were working on the next year, and just, working with that guy was kind of weird because you couldn't figure anything out. He would show up like a whale, answer your questions, and as you're asking one more, he would dive back down into the water, and you're like, wait, but what about the, And so he was really driving me nuts. And my now ex-wife said, why are you doing this again?
Right.
And I said, that's a good point. So I sent him it's not me, or it's not you, it's me thing. He never acknowledged that I quit.
Wow.
So I was just like, yeah. So, and
That's
then it
crazy.
slowly disintegrated.
So would you say then, based upon all these years that your personality and branding is a big part of a show?
It is, and I didn't realize it until like you set yourself up, and people again kind of feel like they know you. And Todd, you were in the room at Podcast Movement when the kind of the standards project kind of was birthed.
Yeah.
And I remember because at that time I was working with Libsyn, and somebody was talking about Libsyn and if I would ever leave. And Todd's like, oh, I'll hire you in a minute. And then somebody else said, oh, if you ever leave, like he just, and so you don't realize that you've kind of put yourself out there. And it's a great way. I always say, if I'm a college student, start a podcast because that's part of your resume.
Yeah.
If you can do a podcast about the field you want to move into, do that. So
all of our.
Well, the other thing that I never understand is, I was very honored. You were talking to Dave on your last show, and he said, I got to meet Dave Jackson. And in my head, I'm like, so? But to him, it's like, oh, it's Dave Jackson.
That's right.
And so I've had people say, I remember once Emily Prokop said, well, I met you probably 2 years before I talked to you. She said, I met you in an elevator, but I was too afraid to say anything. And I was like, I'm like, I am like a big cuddly teddy bear. How am I at all intimidating? And she's like, you don't realize it,
Yeah,
Dave Jackson.
And and I run into that quite a bit too. It's and you try to be nice and friendly. Oh, you're really nice. I'm like,
does he come across mean on the show? I don't think so.
I don't think so. It's as a new podcaster, we've learned these things over the years, and some of this stuff comes over time. So that's again goes back to this realization: you have to do the show long enough to reap the rewards of your work.
Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. It just, we all want it to. Who doesn't?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes there's it's the the stars align and someone has instant success. Yeah, other conversation I have all the time is, oh, I've only got 2,250 people listen to my show. And I'll be like, okay, are you at your computer? Yes. Google, what does 2,250 people look as an image? And Google's pretty good about that. They'll show you a group of 2,000 people. And I'm like, print that image and put that somewhere where you see that every day and realize that's how many people you're talking to. And it can be 100, it could be 250, 500, 50. But I always tell people, if you're going to Rotary and there's only be 50 people there, but you're going to be in front of them, talking to them, how much do you prepare? Do you prepare your podcast the same way you would as if you were going to step in front of them in person? And people give me this look, and they kind of have this moment because it's all in the ethosphere of the internet. But when we visualize that these are the number of people we're talking to, I think people take the creation process maybe a little more seriously.
Well, my background's in teaching, and when I pulled up my class and I saw, I'm teaching Microsoft Excel tomorrow to 20 people. I was like, 20 people? I'm like, okay, I hope they're well behaved. That was a full class, a lot of questions. I got to keep things moving. And so when somebody says, well, I've only got 80 people, I go, at my old building, that was the entire hallway. It was 4 classrooms of people. And then the things I always remind people, I'm like, they could be playing Xbox. They could be watching Netflix or Hulu or TikTok or whatever, listening to the radio, watching TV, whatever. But they chose to listen to you. They choose to watch you. There's no spam in podcasting. No. If I don't like your show, I swipe left, I hit delete, and there's nothing you can do about that. Yeah. And so I go, they chose to come to hear what you had to say. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's as much as, like, I do a show on Saturday that's kind of off the top of my head because it's live, and you and Rob do the same thing, so you're kind of just riffing. But nonetheless, the only way we can remotely pull that off is because of our experience. Mm-hmm. If I had just started out, now it's just an exercise in how well can Dave improv, right? And that's usually, if you're not new to, I've been to Second City in Chicago, so like one of the top improv places in the world, and I've seen those guys just skit after skit after skit just bomb horribly. And I'm like, so sometimes improv isn't the way to go if you're just starting out.
No, I agree, and planning is important. We talk for 2 hours. We don't have 2 hours, but what's next? Where do you see this thing going the next 5 to 10 years? Because, boy, I tell you, my crystal ball is a little bit cloudy beyond like 3 years.
Bingo. It's the thing that I've said, I don't know where we're going, but I brought my popcorn because I've got a member of the School of Podcasting. He teaches at Louisiana Tech, and he does a show called AI Goes to College. So his niche is not just AI, but how can professors use this, and how can they detect if your student has, plagiarized something and things of that nature. And so he's always sending me stuff where he's like, you're not going to believe this. And I go, and I always reply, I'm like, wow, that's cool and spooky at the same time. And so I think, and I've heard Adam talk about this, I think I agree with this, that we're going to get a swell of very mediocre content.
Oh, it's already on YouTube. It's horrible.
Yeah, and I saw a YouTube video, and the guy said, find, search for your topic on YouTube, find the top 2 videos, transcribe them, and throw them into ChatGPT and have it write a script. And I went, so the way you're going to be seen as a thought leader is to borrow someone else's thoughts and make them your own. And that doesn't, I watch a lot of YouTube in my living room now. I'm much more than I did 2 years ago. And there was a guy, and this is what I tell all my clients. I'm like, lean into being human, because at least yet, although I was playing with ChatGPT last night, and I use it sometimes for stuff I do at my church. And so I was like, hey, give me some scriptures on this topic, because I got to do this presentation, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, it's like, hey, good luck with your sermon. And I was like, well, it's not really a sermon, but okay. and I'll be praying for you. And I was like, ChatGPT is going to be praying for me. I was like, well,
Wow.
that's different. Yeah.
That's a little unsettling, actually.
Yeah. So that's the part where it's hard to say, where are we going?
Yeah.
I mean, every year it gets bigger and bigger. I'm worried about the walled gardens, and that's why both you and I are kind of like, hey guys, like, it's all fun and games until you get kicked off of YouTube. You
Boom.
know?
Oh,
Yeah.
at least 3 a week. I get at least 3 a week of people coming to me that are, what am I gonna do? YouTube has
Mhm.
banned me. And what do you talk about? Oh, I talk about sports, or I talk about finance. They've just said something.
Yeah. They said the magic word. Yes. And
Yeah, or a series of magic words. And, for a while it was all the shows that were doing gun shows. Those were all being demonetized and deplatformed. So, it just depends on the waves of whatever the algorithms think. I think, though, that people will be seeking out original voices and sincere because it's good. It's already prevalent. As a matter of fact, I downvote anytime I hit a YouTube that's just somebody talking and it's scripted and it's just showing pictures. I downvote the video every time because it's just an AI voice. It's not real. And hopefully to, discourage the algorithm from promoting that but people must be listening to, because they're surfacing it. So I still think original voices. And probably the biggest question is, everyone's been talking about video. I've done video for 15 years, largely because I was lonely doing the audio podcast by myself because I was doing a solo show. And I really didn't even, I was before YouTube and didn't even get on the YouTube bandwagon. I probably could have been successful over there if I'd done that. But what are you telling people when they're saying now, like, do I need a video podcast too?
Yeah, the first thing I ask them is, do you want to be on video?
Yeah.
And if they go, well, no. In fact, I've had people that have come to me with like really good ideas for a podcast. I'm like, this would be amazing. And I'm like, why? What's stopping you? And again, I think it's going to be, I'm going to have to talk them through this. And they go, oh, I don't want to do video. And I'll go, well, don't do video.
Yeah, 95% of podcasts are not video.
Yeah. And they'll go like, what do you mean don't do video? I'm like, just do audio. And they're like, yeah, but everybody says I need to do video. And I go, please consider the source on that.
Mm-hmm.
The source, the big source that's saying you need to do video is this thing called YouTube.
Yeah.
And I go, of course they want you to do video so they can run ads against it. I go, that you're not going to get a dime from until you get X amount of thousands of hours. And I go, and then, YouTube, a great place to make money. And if you're lucky, we'll let you keep a little bit of it,
Yeah.
and I get it. They got to pay for their bandwidth. But yeah, it's,
and if you're not feeding their algorithm, then you're married to that thing like milk and cows.
Well, that's it. I always say, realize if you're going to do YouTube, and I always say this, like, hey, look, I'm not anti-YouTube, but again, let's go realistic here. I've got my audio podcast, and then you start a video podcast that you think is going to help grow the audio podcast. And then I'm like, well, what are you going to do? I said, to grow the video podcast, it's almost like starting a third podcast, and that's studying the algorithm and working on your thumbnails and all this other stuff. I said, it's really like starting a third podcast if you're going to keep up with that. And I said, and how many hours do you plan on doing this a week? And so I just, again, if you want to do YouTube and you're doing this cool arts and crafts thing that people got to see, well, by all means, do YouTube. Don't call it a podcast.
Yeah.
That kind of drives me nuts. But it's one of those things I'm just like, just go in with your eyes open and, maybe do a couple and see what it was like. I always tell people there's a bunch of tools online. I use a thing called clockify.me. And when I start something, I hit the clock. And then like this episode's around an hour, but we're probably going to talk for, if we were to count the whole thing, probably close to an hour and a half. Well, that hour and a half counts.
Right.
Like, we're not just counting finished minutes.
Yep.
And by the time you figure out the amount of time you researched, and then, you either do a great presentation or you edit or whatever it is. But in the end, the best, and this was just with audio, the best I've ever done was 4-to-1. So a 15-minute podcast would take me an hour. But I said, that's after years and years and years of practice.
Yep.
And I go, so it takes a lot more time than people think.
I hired a guy to do prep, and it saves me an hour of a 4-hour process. I still have an hour. He does the prep. I do the review. That takes an hour. Get everything ready to go. Hit record. 50 minutes to do the show. Then I have an hour of post. So it's at least 4 hours to put out one audio episode. And the reason it's even faster is because I don't edit. If you start adding editing time into that, then bam, then the hours start racking up even more. And so.
But you mentioned you read that prep. That's your editing time. You swatch it from editing to prep.
To prep. Yeah, you prep better, you don't have to edit as much.
Right.
But the only reason I learned that was, well, be honest with you, the reason I didn't edit before is I had kids, and they were banging on the door when Dad's going to come out and, take us to bed and good night. That was, I didn't have time to edit. And I was doing a news show, and every minute that elapsed from the time I hit stop to the time the show went live, that news was expiring. And so for me, there was no waiting a day. There was not waiting an hour. It was get it out now. And then the video kind of followed the same suit. I just said, cut the ends of it and it'll be what it is.
That's it.
But some people can't live with that. Some people have to edit because that's just their personality.
Yeah. I always say if I can make myself sound smarter, I'll do it, but the stuff I'm cutting out, like a lot of times if I'm doing an interview, I'll give someone a lot of backstory. Hey, I know you did this, and that's why you did this, and then later you did this, and then I will finally ask them the question, and that background is showing the guest kind of why am I asking this question, and so hopefully I can get the answer I'm looking for. And in the end, I go, my audience doesn't need to hear that.
They don't care.
So I'll just go in and go highlight, delete, But if you don't have the time, more prep is, I always say it's like a seesaw. More planning equals less editing. No planning, lots of editing.
Editing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Dave, kind of wrap this school podcasting and you, what do you think your biggest successes have been and challenges?
My biggest success, well, in a way, just getting people to press record. I mean, I've got, Scott Johnson, who does What Was That Like for a while, was a member of the School of Podcasting. Darren Dake, who does the Corner podcast, who now, boy, talk about sometimes there's just luck involved, that he found out that he came up with a course and got accredited because there are corners across the country that need to re-up their certification, and there was no place to go.
Wow.
And so he used to send people he actually had a building, had like a school, and right at the end of 2019, he went online. So 2020 rolls around, COVID hits, and it was so he's making really nice money now, but he started off just because he wanted to talk to other corners because, who wants to talk about dead bodies and blood and stuff like that? So that's a great example.
That's a niche audience in itself. My goodness. Yeah. Not one I'm going to tune into.
Yeah. And so, where I see us going is I am leaning a little stronger into now making sure people at the School of Podcasting connect with each other, because that's really one of the biggest benefits. Yeah, the courses are cool and things of that nature, but we've got a really cool, tight-knit community over there. Nice. People, when a new person comes in, we all welcome them in, and it's always fun to see somebody come in, because that's the thing I love about it is when I have somebody who barely has an idea, that keeps me remembering what it's like to be frightened to press the record button. So, because to me, I'm like, we're just like, well, just press record. And like, yeah, we can say that, but we have to get back in the shoes of that newbie. And so that's one of the things I really love about it. But, so I'll be adding, it's one of those things where it used to be, I remember our buddy Paul Culligan said, there are two things people are saying about the School of Podcasting. He's like, one thing is you can find everything you want. He goes, the bad news is you can find everything you want. He goes, you need to streamline that a bit. And so that's when I was like, well, I've got my set courses and I'm getting people from A to B. Now I need to figure out how to get them from A to B faster, because that's what everybody wants. So I'm always got my eye out for what is working when it comes to growth and, trying to, I remember when audiograms came out, right? And everybody's like, ooh, look, a squiggly line, And I was like, well, let's see if that moves the needle at all.
Right. It looks
And
cool,
so,
but doesn't
yeah, so
help. The content sucks.
yeah. So I always I listen to your shows. I listen to, the Buzzcast. I listen to the feed. I listen to, a million different podcasts about podcasting. Danny Brown talked about Rephonic, and I've known about Rephonic because they have that cool little graph thing they do. But apparently, if you actually sign up for a free account, you get insights on your audience. And I'm like, I did not know that. So I've always got my ear to the ground to see if somebody found something that I missed. And I do that because I love podcasting.
And old dogs have to be taught new tricks.
That's it. Well, I learned that from being a teacher that, back then, in the early days of Word and Excel, I taught a lot of Microsoft Office and QuickBooks and stuff like that. And if you didn't keep learning, it wasn't that you were going backwards.
Yeah.
So
and they just piled and piled and piled stuff on. So we do need to go. Let this audience go. Where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me over at schoolofpodcasting.com. That's my main show. If you want to see all things Dave, that's at powerofpodcasting.com.
Awesome. Dave, thanks for spending time with me. We'll have you on again. We'll go down a different route, but appreciate it. And again, another trusted soul here in podcasting, and this is who we've been talking to recently. And if you say Dave Jackson at an event, make sure you come up and say hello.
Yeah, please do. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Todd.
All right, Dave. Thanks.